Sorry, okay. So, Numbers is the fourth book of what is called the Pentateuch. Okay, we've mentioned this before. Basically, the 5 books, literally. Okay, but it's the 5 major books of the law. Okay, so when you specifically talk about Jewish, the way the Jews separate out the Old Testament, you have the law, and then you have poetry. So typically they run a little bit different than the way we look at it, but that's kind of how we do it. We add, if you were to go through and look in a Sunday school class at the books of the Bible and look at the Old Testament, it goes then history, poetry, then the major prophets and the minor prophets. Okay, and I've mentioned this before. If you've ever wondered why it's the major prophets and the minor prophets, the major prophet. No, Isaiah and Jeremiah are both 30 and 40 chapters long. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but they're both more than chapters. Ezekiel, Lamentations and Ezekiel are both long. Daniel is 12 chapters. And when you get into the minor prophets, for example, Obadiah is 1 chapter. If you were to go look in your Bible right now, Obadiah is 1 page, if that. Very, very short. But literally, when you look at major prophet versus minor prophet, that Isaiah is one of the major prophetic figures in the entire Old Testament. Jeremiah and Lamentations are both written by the same person. They're both written by Jeremiah, who's the next kind of major prophetic voice. Ezekiel fit into that same time frame and is a major prophetic voice. And then Daniel. Obviously, those are the ones we call major prophets. But really, if we're being completely honest, it is simply that the major prophet books are longer. Isaiah tends to be the highest on that level. Isaiah is often called the gospel of the Old Testament. Jeremiah does. All the prophets have a lot about Jesus, but Isaiah tends to be. Sorry, that was my oldest son. I'm going to let him know I'm in Bible study. So, but when you look at there are those, even not in Jewish culture, but when you look at the difference between the Jews and the Samaritans only used the first 5 books. They only used the Pentateuch. They didn't believe in any of the rest. The Jews tended to hold to the entirety of the Old Testament. Their books are ordered different, and there's some differences there, but actually the Protestant version of the Old Testament was taken directly from the books the Jews chose that were appropriate, that they canonized. So we are really look at this discover. Jesus often uses this phrase, the law and the prophets. So this is law. Okay. Author, once again, is Moses. I know there are people that try to say that is not the case. It is the case. Moses wrote, which also gives us a little bit of information about the date here. Numbers would have had to have been right near the end of Moses, very close to the end of his life because of the information that's there. We will find in Numbers that we go all the way from Mount Sinai all the way to the years. It actually covers a huge amount of time frame. So sometime around 1405, 1400 BC. We don't know exactly, but it's before they cross over the Jordan River, but right at the end of their wandering. So the other thing that's important is the reason it is called Numbers the reason it's called Numbers is because it begins and basically ends with a counting. There is some additional stuff after the final census, but chapter 1 begins with, hey, God told us to count and see how many people there are. And by the end of it, we find out that there are the army, which is all men above the age of 20, is 655,000, give or take, a little over 500,000. Most scholars think that since you add women and children, and when we talk about children, anyone under the age of 20 would have fallen under children, that we're probably looking at close to 2 million people wandering around in the wilderness.
A lot of people.
Key verse you will find in Numbers chapter 14, verse 34. Okay. According to the number of days in which you spy. Okay, so it says, according to the number of days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, a year for each day. You shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure. Okay, so this kind of leads us into the beginning of the discussion. So we have the Numbers begins with them still around Mount Sinai. Okay, remember that right at the end of Exodus, they come to Mount Sinai, they get the 10 Commandments, God begins to give them the law. We have the entire book of Leviticus is written while they are at Sinai. It takes place while they're at Sinai. And the counting, the census, and all of that take place at Sinai. They sit at Sinai for almost 2 years. They spend a significant amount of time camped at Mount Sinai for them to receive God's instructions. Okay. Then in Numbers 10 is where they finally leave. Okay. And we immediately have problems. It does not take long. Okay. Israel leaves Sinai at the end of chapter 10 after they have given offerings for the purpose of the tabernacle and worship and all of that. And finally, in chapter 10, verse 11, in second year, in the second month, on the 22nd, on the 20th day of the month, the cloud lifted from over the tabernacle, and the people of Israel set by stages from the wilderness of Sinai. The cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. They set out for the first time at the command of the Lord by Moses. Okay, remember that in Exodus we found that it was the pattern of this is that the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire would lift up off the tabernacle and move to the edge of the camp. And at that point, the Levites would come in stages. And Aaron would go in and they would cover all the furniture. They'd cover the Ark of the Covenant. They'd cover the tables. They'd cover all of that. Then a specific group of the Levites would come in and gather up the now covered furniture for the tabernacle, pick it up, carry it out. Then they'd have a group that came in and tore the tent down and picked up all the stuff that was part of the walls of the tent and the cover of the tent, and they'd load all of it up and they'd carry it out. And then by tribe, the children of Israel would collect themselves behind the ark and behind Levi, and they would march. Okay. We're not going to go into great detail, but when you get to a couple chapters earlier, and I will mention it, but we're not going to go over it in detail. You will find in chapter, I got to find where it is. I think it's chapter 4. I'm looking. Hold on. Sorry. In either chapter 3 of their camping order. Okay. Actually, it looks like I was wrong. Nope, there it is. Chapter 2. So in chapter 2, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, said, the people of Israel shall camp each by his own standard with the banner of his father's house. And literally he gave them, okay, tabernacle's in the center, the leaders are around the tabernacle, and these 3 tribes are on the east side, these 3 tribes are on the north side, these 3 tribes are on the west side, and these 3 tribes are on the south side. That's how you camp every time. Okay, so God even gave them instructions of how they were to set up. Okay, so all of those are details that go on. Chapter 10, they leave. By the time you get to chapter 11, they have made some poor choices. And in chapter 11, sorry, I'm getting back there now. Chapter 11, we see their first complaints. Okay. In fact, in the beginning of chapter 11, it says, and the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled. The fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of camp. So fire came down from the Lord and began to burn the edges of their camp. And they fought, and then Moses prayed, and God goes, okay, I'll stop. Then immediately after that, verse 4 says, now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving. Some scholars believe that what this is the rabble are groups of Egyptians who chose to travel with them. It does appear that there were some from Egypt who chose to follow God and go with him. Well, they begin to start problems. But the Jews step in on it immediately. Well, how come we don't have any meat to eat? How come all we have is this bread? And we remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, and the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up and there's nothing left for us, this manna to look at. Then Numbers describes the manna again. And so God gets angry. And he goes, well, you want meat? I'll give you meat. I'll give you meat. I'll give you so much meat, you're going to be sick of meat. And he sends so much quail that God says, I'm going to gorge it to the point that you're sick. And that's exactly what happens. There ends up being a plague over all the quail he sends. As a punishment, he gives them what they asked for in abundance.
That's why it says be careful what you ask.
Okay. So that is important. We have the quail. It literally says, verse 33 of chapter 11 says, while the meat was yet between their teeth before consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck down the people with a very great plague. Okay. There was so much quail in the, okay. Now, then the next that is major in this is in chapter 13, we have the spies sent. Okay. So this is one of the very, very important understandings that we need to get to. It should have taken them 3 weeks to get to Jordan. The trip was a couple of weeks. And in truth, if they hadn't gone to the Sinai, they could have been all the way from Egypt to Canaan in 3 weeks. They go to Sinai, they get a couple of years there, and then God says, okay, time to go to the promised land. And within a month, they're at the promised land. We need to check it out. And it seems very clear that God told them to do this. So he chooses one guy from each tribe. Okay. We have 2 names that you need to remember. One man from each tribe, but 2 names you need to remember. It is interesting in verse 16 that it says Hoshea the son of Nun. It's almost certainly Joshua, just a different spelling of his name. Okay. The other one is the representative from Judah, whose name is Caleb. Okay. They spend 40 days spying out the land. We know that primarily, at least for Caleb, the land that he spied out was in what would become the tribe of Judah. However, we don't know how much of the land they spied, but they went in and looked at the land. They come back, and by the way, this is very fun to get into. They went up to the Negeb, Hebron, Ahanim. They mention cities. They mention all of that. And then it says they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a single cluster of grapes that they had to carry on a pole between them. So one cluster of grapes that was so big, one person couldn't carry it. That's how fruitful the land is. Okay. But the 12 spies come before the people and they say, oh, yes, it's absolutely incredible. It really is a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's the problem. There's some really big guys there. The cities are fortified and there are giants. And I mean, it's crazy. We can't do it. 10 of the spies make that report. Okay. 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, say, if God's going to give it to us, he can beat those guys. But the people's heart is turned to fear and they refuse to go in, which leads us to the discussion of chapter 4. And they refuse to trust God to give them what he's promised. And so God, as you might expect, gets very, very angry. And so he says, okay, you don't want to go in, then here's the punishment. And that's the main verse we just looked at. For every day that the spies were in the land, since you decided to listen to their naysaying, you will spend 1 year wandering around. Now, there's another part to this. It's 40 years is important, but what is more important is this. Every person over the age of 20 years old will die. Joshua and Caleb. So during that 4 years, every person who is over the age of 20 at this moment will die in the desert. It will be a complete purge of that entire generation of people. He said, after all I did to bring you out of Egypt, after all I did to show you myself at Mount Sinai, chosen to reject that I can do what I've told you I'm going to do for you. And so, who will grow up and watch as you wander around, they'll get to see it. Okay. The 40-year discussion is important, but also as important is that God basically tells them that except for the 2 men that said that God could do it. Now, at this point, that does not, well, I'm going to say it this way. At this moment, it does not appear that that includes Aaron and Moses, but later it becomes that. Okay, even Aaron and Moses don't make it. Interesting a little bit of information. We know that Moses' son Aaron's son Eleazar, who is the high priest later, is under the age of 20 at this point, because he's the high priest when they go in. But remember, Eleazar's the 3rd son of Aaron. The first two were killed because they didn't pay attention. They didn't do their worship. They didn't lead worship correctly. They offered strange fire, as the term that is used in the Bible. Okay, so here is what then happens. Then the children of Israel go, oh my gosh, we don't want that to happen. Okay, we'll go. And Moses, you have already rejected. If you go now, you'll be wiped out. But a bunch of them go anyway, and they get thromped by the people. Which, by the way, this is important, which is exactly what they were worried was going to happen when they said they wouldn't go. With God on their side, they would have won. Without God on their side, they're right about what would happen. Okay. So that leads us to the discussion of the 40 years in the wilderness. Okay. It is important that we understand that this is the telltale moment of this story, is that they rejected God's provision for them. It is something they do over and over again, right? You can almost guarantee that every time they do it, they're going to make some mention about, why couldn't we have just stayed in Egypt? You can almost guarantee that's going to happen every time. Okay. So God begins to punish them because they are not paying attention. Okay. Now, the rest of the rest of the book details their discussion of through the 40 years. Okay. When 40 years are almost over, then we come to the next kind of major moment within the book. We see a set of two kings on the eastern side of the Jordan River. They are not inside the promised land, but they are Canaanites. They're related to the Canaanites, but they live on the eastern side of the Jordan. God puts them in a situation where they end up in battle against Israel. Israel defeats them and takes their land on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Okay, so they've already had two major battles with two major enemies and found victory. At this point, the Amorites decide on an extra plan, which brings us to the next kind of really fun story of this. The king of the Amorites calls in a prophet. Now, it appears, at least in some level, that he's not Jewish, but he is a prophet of God, because God speaks to him several times. He's not Jewish, but he is a follower of the Hebrew God. And he goes, hey, you're a prophet. Why don't you come and speak a curse against the children of Israel so that they don't wipe us out? Most of you know this name, Balaam. Okay, Balaam. Now, I'm going to be completely fair. We're going to go into a little more detail here because this may be my favorite story in the entire Bible. Maybe it comes close. So Balaam says, well, and offers him money. By the way, that's the other thing that we need to make sure to mention. We'll pay you a bunch of money if you come curse Israel in the name of God. And Balaam, no, but I really would like the money. But I really can't say anything that God told me not to say. But okay. I tell you what, I'll come. And when I get there, we'll see what God will do. Hops up on his donkey that he's riding, and he begins to head towards the place where he's supposed to meet. By the way, the king's name is Balak, Balak. And while he's traveling, an angel shows up in front of him. And the donkey shies away and runs Balaam's foot into a hedge, I think is how that works. Hold on, let me actually go to the story because I want to make sure I get it right. Like I said, this is such a fun story.
Mine says a wall.
Yeah, a wall. Okay. I was coming back to this. Okay. So, but it begins in verse 22 of chapter 22. It says, but God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of the Lord took his hand in the way as his adversary. He's riding on his donkey, and his two servants standing in the road with a drawn sword. And the donkey turned aside out on the road and went into a field. So the first time he sees him standing there, he goes, no, I don't want to go towards him. So he goes wandering off into a field. And Balaam proceeds to beat the donkey. Leads the donkey back to the road, hops back on, gets going again. And then a little bit further, the donkey saw, so this time the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on either side. So now the donkey can't turn. So he runs the donkey into the wall on the side of the road and crushes his foot. So he beats her again. Gets back up on the road, starts off again. This time, the angel of the Lord goes ahead and he stands in a place where there is no turn aside to the right or the left. Remember, each time, what does the angel of the Lord have in his hand? A drawn weapon. So what is his plan?
Off with his head.
Okay. This time the donkey stops and won't move. I'm so surprised. So Balaam is very angry, so he begins to beat the donkey again. And then comes my favorite part of this story. Verse 28, then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, what have I done that you're beating me? So imagine the moment here. Suddenly his donkey is, why are you beating me? Balaam says to the donkey, so I don't know if this, I wonder if he doesn't think about it before that, but you've made a fool of me. I wish I had a sword in my hand, I'd kill you. The donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you've ridden all life long to this day? Is it my habit to treat you this way? No. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, his drawn sword in his hand. Now, I'm going to be very honest in the way I say this. Some of you have heard me say it before. We often have a discussion about what an angel looks like. Okay, how many times in art do we have angels as little bitty babies with wings? Or the other one is often, really pretty women with wings. Okay, that does not appear to be the discussion of the Bible. And here is why I say that. There is a reaction to an angel showing up that is very, very powerful. Okay. 9 times out of 10, the first words an angel says to somebody when they show up is, don't be afraid. I want to point out that this is number 10. The angel does not tell Balaam not to be afraid. Why? Because Balaam ought to be afraid. Okay. By the way, I will mention this. There's a discussion here that we want to make sure we understand. often in the Old Testament, when you see this phrasing, the angel of the Lord, okay, it is speak. Okay, the reason we say that, reason some scholars say that, is because the angel of the Lord is the one who shows up to Moses at the burning bush. And what is Moses' first reaction? To worship. Later, Joshua sees the angel of the Lord. What does he do? He worships. Let me make sure you understand, when we talk about an angel does not accept worship. When we see an angel show up and someone tries to worship him, the first thing an angel does is go, no, 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 no. I'm not worthy. The angel of the Lord accepts worship. That. But I do want to make sure to at least mention that that is something that we often look at, that construction, the angel of the Lord. The other thing I will mention is the other time we see the angel of the Lord specifically in battle is when the Assyrians are camped around Jerusalem during the days of Hezekiah. And it says the angel of the Lord came and killed 185,000 Assyrians in the space of one night. So Balaam would not have been a challenge. Okay. The Assyrians are camped all around Jerusalem. There are massive amounts of them. And the angel of the Lord comes and strikes down nearly 200,000 of them just in the dark hours of the night. And it says the rest of them ran. The next morning they get up and look out, and there's nothing but dead bodies out on the plain. The army's gone, and everything still there is a dead body. So the angel of the Lord, when he gets angry, that means business. Which also should tell us something. If you want to hold that this is the idea of this is the second person of the Trinity, this is Jesus. Remember that in Revelation, we have Jesus come this time for war. When he means business, there's no escape. Remember that Revelation talks very specifically about him coming, that his second coming is in wrath. Okay. In fact, the term "the grapes of wrath" from the John Steinbeck books and all of that comes out of the Bible, talking about the idea that there's a wine press in heaven that has been trampled, and that the wine that has come out is an example of the wrath of God. So you think of the grapes, the grapes of wrath. They're trampled we hear it in the song, right? He's trampling out where the grapes of wrath are stored. That's the picture that they're trying to make in that song. So understand that there are times that an angel shows up and it's to give a message that's good and to help and to guide. There are also times angels show up to punish. So it literally says, the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam. He saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "So why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I've come to oppose you because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned aside before me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely just now I would have killed you and let her live." Now, I do want to, just in this discussion of the angel Lord thing, notice that it's not your way is perverse before God. It's your way is perverse before me. He's speaking on behalf of God. He's speaking as God. And that's something we see from him as well in the Old Testament. Okay. So then the angel of the Lord, then Balaam says, "I have sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the road against me. Therefore, if it is evil in your sight, I will turn back." And the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with the men, but speak only what I tell you." Okay. So Balaam went on. So Balaam ends up at this place where Balak wants him to be to curse Israel. And he goes out the first time and he says what God told him to say. He ends up blessing Israel. And Balak goes, okay, so you weren't able to curse him from here. Let's go over to this other mountain. And maybe from this vantage point, you can curse him. And that goes on 4 times. And each time Balaam blesses Israel. Now, sounds like a happy ending for Balaam and all of that, and the children of Israel. It is not. Okay, so chapter 25. Okay, so Balak is a king of Moab. I apologize, I had that wrong. He's a Moabite king. Okay, now chapter 25, verse 1. While Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. They invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. Now, here is the important thing. It does not ever say this in Numbers. However, when we get into the New Testament, when we get later into the Old Testament, this act of chapter 25 is connected every time to Balaam. So what appears to happen is Balaam then tells Balak, well, I can't curse him, but if you want God to curse him, here's what you do. You convince them to start marrying your daughters. And invite them to all your pagan rituals, and you get them to start following your gods. And then God will take care of them. And through the name is literally for a man who leads them into sin. Okay, so I want to mention that. Okay, so we have an interesting moment here in the midst of this story, because it says one of the people of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his family. So he married a foreign woman and he brought her home to his family. And Phineas, who is the grandson of Aaron. Aaron has passed away by this point. Okay. Aaron has died. So Eleazar is the high priest. Phineas is his son and priest. He sees it and he literally gets up, leaves the group he's with, grabs a spear, and then goes and runs the guy through. Actually, him and the woman. Okay. And at that point, this is a point that plague begins. I'm sorry, I didn't mention this. A plague begins because of them intermarrying. Okay, clearly the law of Moses said they were not to do that. Okay, because it would lead them to what? To idolatry, which is exactly what it did. So the plague has started. Phineas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it. He rose, went and grabbed a spear, and he ran the man and the woman through. And that act stops the plague. But 24,000 children of Israel die because of this in a plague. Probably 24,002, but okay. So then there's a moment where God speaks to Moses about Phineas because of him not turning back. And then in chapter 26, we begin the next set of census. Okay. So at this point, now this is important that we get to. They have gone from the first counting was done at Sinai. Okay. Then they've done all this travel. So almost a full 40 years have passed now. The second counting is right before they travel into the promised land. So they have now taken over these small areas on the eastern side of the Jordan, and they are ready to cross. The 40 years are over. And in fact, you're probably looking at the idea that this 24,000 finishes off that generation. Okay, so now it's time to get moving. So they begin another count to see what the people number are. So they know the size of the military.
I got a question.
Yes.
All of these different clans, at the end, it says like a Shalamite. is that a significant.
So
Is it just a clan?
happens is you have, so look, if you look at verse 5, Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, the sons of Reuben group is you have the clan of the Anakites, and that is one of the sons of Reuben, and he makes up a clan.
Okay.
So you have Reuben is the tribe, and then each of the sons of Reuben would be the head of a clan. And then you had clans, families, it kind of goes down. Very tribal culture. And so you have the tribe, which is all of those that are born Reuben. But then you have a set of clans that are, well, I'm a descendant of his firstborn son. I'm a descendant of his secondborn son. I'm a descendant of his thirdborn son. One of the best places, let's actually go there. Go to Joshua for just a minute. It's going to be chapter 7, I believe. Okay. So it's chapter 7, and we will look at, trying to make sure I get the right one here. Okay. So verse 16, this is after, so if you'll remember, this is after the Battle of Jericho. It's after their huge victory at Jericho. They lose to Ai because Achan, a man by the name of Achan, did what he wasn't supposed to. So let's make sure we understand, out of 1 million people, out of 600,000 military people, he alone decides to break God's rule. And he gets something from Jericho. They get ready to go into their next battle and they get whooped. Okay. So Joshua tears his clothes and everybody's in mourning because God has abandoned them. And God goes, nope, I haven't abandoned you. You sinned. So you need to root this out today. Or you need to root this out right away. So he tells him, in the morning, you shall bring every person in Israel by family. Okay. And then I'll show you who did it. So it goes on. It says, so Joshua rose early in the morning and brought Israel near, tribe by tribe. Now, what appears to be happening here, and it's important that we get this, is if you'll recall, in the priestly garments, there is a method that they could use to help determine God's will, called the Urim and the Thummim. We have no idea what that actually is. It is something, we kind of get the idea it's something similar to like dice or something, throwing bones or whatever. But it was a way for God to let the priest determine his will. Okay. So what happened is as each tribe is brought by, they would ask God. And finally, God gave them the yes answer with the tribe of Judah. So then they clear everybody else out and they begin to bring just the tribe of Judah by clan. Okay, by each of the clans of Judah, which would have been each of his kids. Okay, and the clan of the Zerahites was taken. So now we've limited out another large group of people and they get to go back to the camp. So then he brings the Zerahites by head of the household. So each of the heads of the households, and Zabdi's taken. Then he brings his household by man. So each member of his household comes by one at a time, and God picks Achan. So now he's narrowed it down to one man. So Joshua comes and goes, what'd you do? Notice, this is exactly how it says, my son, give glory to the Lord God of Israel and give praise to him and tell me now what you've done. And he goes, well, I saw this cloak and I saw some silver and I saw some gold and I coveted it and I took it. Okay. And God goes, okay, Joshua goes, okay, so here's the issue. And at that point, they bring his entire family. So his wife, his children, actually it mentions his livestock. And they literally stone all of them to death and then bury them. Okay. Now, that discussion seems a little harsh. But what is God doing? He's trying to say, hey, there's no halfway here. Okay. Now, so the main reason I bring that up is, as you can see, that they're broken apart that way. You have the tribe, then you have a clan, then you have a household, then you have a family, then you have a person, and it kind of goes that way. Okay. We see it again in the Levites, that the Levites' jobs are differentiated by what clan they were in. So they're all of the tribe of Levi, but this clan of Levi had this job, and this clan of Levi had this job, and this clan of Levi had that job. And so you will see names that you go, well, that doesn't sound like a Jewish name. And you can't always tell for sure, but sometimes it's a clan name or a family name that falls under one of the tribes. It also gets a little confusing because some of them are the same. I don't remember which ones, but there are actually a couple where, there's this clan of the Reubenites, and then there's this clan of the Judahites, and they have the same name because that's the guy. So, some of that runs into. But we come back to another census. Then following the census, we have what really amounts to a little bit of housekeeping. That's basically the best way to say it. First of all, we have a group from the tribe of Manasseh. Okay, a group of girls from the tribe of Manasseh. Their dad would have been one of the ones who was 20 years and was over 20 years at the beginning of all of this. So he's died, but he had no sons. Okay. And before Moses, and they say, I've got to ask you a question. Our dad died. By the way, he died in one of the rebellions against Moses. But he says, but our father's name will be wiped out because we'll inherit, but as soon as we get married, then it'll go to our husband from whatever tribe, thereon. Can we keep it? Can you give it to us? Can it transfer to us instead of transferring to our husband or to somebody else? And Moses goes to the Lord, and the Lord tells him they're right. Give them the possession of the inheritance among their father's brothers and transfer the inheritance of their father to them. However, the one rule, you have to marry within your tribe. So, and remember, there's 70,000 in the tribe. They're not that closely related. This is 400 years of, but the idea is you have to marry within your tribe so that your property stays in your tribe. Okay. But then it begins something that goes into this discussion that if a man only has daughters and he dies, then the possession, and it also brings up the discussion of the kinsman redeemer and all that it helps bring to that. Then in verse 12, we see Joshua named as his successor. Okay. Chapter 28, we go back through all the stuff we did in Leviticus last week. The Passover, all the feast days, they come back up. However, the thing that is different, might be interesting to look at, is it tells what was offered each day, what sacrifices occurred each day of each of the feasts. Okay, that's the purpose. So for example, one example. So we go to the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says on the 15th day of the 7th of the month, you shall have a holy convocation. We've heard all this before. Offer a burnt offering, a food offering. Okay. So it said 13 bulls from the herd, 2 rams, 14 male lambs a year old. This is the national offering. So this is in addition to whatever you offered personally. So as a people, you had to give 13 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, and they'll all without blemish. The main offering, the flour, all that. Then for each of the 13 bulls, 2/10 for each of the and so a very specific discussion of what all the sacrifices were. On the second day, 12 bulls. On the third day, 11 bulls. On the fourth day, 10 bulls. Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of sacrifices that week.
So that's just as a group, not as a person or a
That's not
tribe
each
or-
individual. This is as a group. This is the
One
sacrifices.
massive group, that's what they do.
Yes. Now there are personal sacrifices in the midst of some of that too, but this itself is a discussion of a corporate sacrifice.
And did it come from the priests?
It's
handbook or
unclear.
whatever?
Certainly by the maybe not by this time. It may have been that they purchased them or they chose them from the people. Certainly when we get into the later time of Israel, there was a temple herd and a temple flock that was for that purpose. And there may be even here. We just don't know that for sure. So that goes into there. Then we go into some of the vows and all of these are new laws. We're not going to get into them deeply, but how you handle a vow to make sure that you keep it, or if, okay. 31 is vengeance on Midian for the events of Balaam. So this is where they attack me in response to what Midian did at the behest of Balaam. Then we come to chapter 32, and we have a slight discussion of why there are tribes on the eastern side of the Jordan. Okay, Reuben and Gad and half of the tribe of Manasseh have a lot of flocks, a lot of herd, and the land on the eastern side of the Jordan was very good pasture land. They now have it and all of that. They come to Moses and say, hey, we would like to take our inheritance on the eastern side of the Jordan on this side. Moses immediately kind of half blows a gasket and going, do you remember what happened to your parents when they decided they didn't want to go over? Now you're going to do it too? And they say, no, you don't understand. We want to leave our wives and our children and our livestock over here. We'll build them places to live. We'll build fencing for our herds. We'll prepare all that stuff for that. And then we men will all go in front of the army. We'll be the first ones across the Jordan. And we will go the entire time. We will lead the army the entire time until and this is the term, it's not exactly the term here, but it's certainly the term that comes at the end of Joshua. Until the Lord gives the people rest, until the Lord says that battle is over, we will not come back home. Moses goes to God. God says, yep, sounds good. As long as they will do that, then we will give them their inheritance on the eastern side of the Jordan. Now, there is a group from Manasseh on each side of the river. There is a group from Manasseh on the western side of the Jordan. But Reuben and Gad's inheritance is not across the river. And this is telling us why that is. Okay. Chapter 33 gives us a fairly extensive look at everywhere that the Jews traveled, where they camped, all that. Maybe not every, but pretty close. It gives a complete map of their journey.
And can you trace it in today's?
So the problem is we don't know what a lot of those places are. There are some that we can say for certain, but for most of them, I mean, it's been so long, those places don't exist. They don't have the same name, we can estimate. Okay. And the end of 33, God tells him once again, just drive them all out. Do not spare anyone. Okay. You need to kill them all. You need to drive them all out, or else they will cause you problems. Okay. Chapter 34 then goes into the boundaries, and then the chiefs, the people who will choose the land for their people. Then we go into chapter 5. It talks about the cities of refuge. This was something that had come up in Leviticus, but now they're making more discussion. A city of refuge was an idea. It was a Levite city that there were 3 on the east side of the Jordan, 3 on the west side of the Jordan. If you accidentally killed someone, then the idea was that their family could send someone out to kill you back. That was the way they did it. If you had accidentally killed them, you could flee to a city of refuge. If you fled to a city of refuge and the revenger were to come to that city and say, we want him because he killed our brother, and I'm looking for the man who shot my pa, that kind of thing, then they would then hold a trial. And if you were found guilty, they would hand you over. If you were found that it's an accident, then you could live in that city and not be safe. However, what it says is you had to live in that city until the current high priest died, till the high priest changed over, at which point you were free to go home. But before that, if you left the city, then the avenger could come and kill you, and they wouldn't do anything because you decided to leave when you weren't supposed to. Okay. So that is an important element that goes on later. And then it closes out with a discussion of marriage, and particularly the discussion of those women again, and that they needed to marry in the tribe so the land didn't leave the tribe. Okay. So that is the entirety of the book of Numbers. We actually finished in one time. I'm amazed. I know it was a little like drinking from a fire hose, but we will meet again in 2 weeks. I'm just going to be completely honest. Don't plan on finishing Deuteronomy. We'll dig in, but I will say this: so many places throughout the rest of the Old Testament, we are going to come back to Deuteronomy. Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Most scholars call them it's Deuteronomic history. So the history that it gives all points to the relationship of the people of Israel with the book of Deuteronomy. So it's gonna be important that we hit that significantly. For example, in Kings, when we see Josiah find the book of the law, it's very, very clear that he finds Deuteronomy. The reforms he makes, the things that he does, are all things that are specific to Deuteronomy. As you get ready to look at it, remember that it is Moses's final address. He starts out, he goes through all the history of what got them to the place where they are, and here's how you follow God from here, and here's what happens if you don't. So anyway, I hope this was informative. It's never easy to go